Get it the right way, the healthy way, the ideal way, from Mother Nature, unadulterated.
Was there an Adam? Was there an Eve? Or did we evolve from what we conceived? Either way, we got what we needed when the sun shone down on the Garden of Eden.
Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia, Solartopia, Solartopia. Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia all over God's green world?
Well, we bit that apple and the garden was lost, and so we had to work to pay the cost. And so we went digging into the ground and started to burn many things we found, but don't you know we're gonna...
Hey, everybody, it's Harvey Sluggo Wasserman back to you with another hour at the Solartopia Green Power and Wellness Show here at PRN. Glad to have you with us. We got another amazing show today. We are going to be talking, as the whole world is talking, about Donald Trump and his tortured future, if he has one. We got Ted VAILL on. Ted, you with us?
I'm here.
All right, you're in Malibu, and you're standing, thank God. And boy, I've been reading a lot about Malibu. What a trial! But I think that the nature of that community is really going to bounce back after this terrible tragedy.
We're coming together. We're coming together. We have meetings scheduled, and we are going to fight the next fire ourselves with the help of the fire department and the county sheriffs. I had a meeting with the new sheriff who said he's going to make big changes in the sheriff's department, and I think Sheila Kuehl is going to be looking carefully at the fire department and their failures in fighting the fire and protecting us. So big changes ahead.
Well, we're talking, of course, I do want to have this conversation briefly. Craig Unger, are you on with us? Craig Unger?
Hello?
Greg?
Yes, hello.
Craig, you're with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
I'm here. I can hear all of you.
I can hear you. You're a little faint, but actually, Craig, if you could call back to the station, maybe you get a little better line, that'd be great.
And call back the same number?
Oh, no. Now you're good. I can hear you. You're good now. But before you were a little faint on me. All right. Now, Jerry, we have Jerry. Jerry, what are you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Now, is this Jerry Ashton?
This is Jerry Ashton.
Okay, so Jerry, we're going to talk today about the Trump situation. We may have a couple more minutes for the health as we go on. I know that's your topic, your issue. We had a full show with you last week, and you're welcome to chime in a bit on the health care because I know that's an important issue. But the primary focus today is going to be on Trump and his fate. So if you want to hang in with us, that'd be great. We'll talk a bit further down the road about the health care and how that fits into this situation, which of course it does. Or if you're game for that, that'd be great. And then at 40 minutes, Steve Rosenfeld is going to call in, and we're going to get an update on a major electoral victory, a major judicial victory, actually a legal victory in Pennsylvania that's been won by the Green Party on voting process there. And I want all you guys to stay with us. So, Jerry, if you're good for staying on, we'll talk a bit about universal health care as this plays in about a half hour or 35 minutes. Is that good with you?
That's fine with me.
Okay, great. And like I say, you're going to have some opinions, of course, on Trump and how this all plays out with him. I got to say, as we jump in here with Ted and Craig, Ted is a great legal expert. Ted, you were a federal prosecutor, is that right? Ted VAILL?
I was a prosecutor in my early days, tried a capital case, race murder case, among others.
Wow.
And
good.
That was in the military. Like Ted Lieu was a prosecutor. He was also a prosecutor in the military. It's much the same as in the federal courts, except they use the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
The note?
Right. Of course, there was that great book title Bob Sherrill wrote, Military Justice is to Justice as Military Music is to Music. So I don't know.
Right.
Trump is not...
Sometimes yes, other times it worked. A few good men, you can't handle the truth. Remember that one? That was a military.
Of course. Yeah, truth, you can't handle the truth. Yes, indeed. And Craig Unger, Craig Unger, you are the author of the truly astounding book, House of Putin, House of Trump. And I want to start with you, if that's okay. I have a question for you. Now, your book, Craig Unger, and you've written for Vanity Fair and many other major publications. You're a great journalist. Your previous book, House of Saudi, House of Bush, is that right?
House of Bush, House of Saud, and it's also House of Trump, House of Putin. But even I got confused. I got it. A lot of houses.
Sorry about that. Well, got to keep our priorities straight here. And Jerry Ashton, your book on healthcare is... Jerry, you still there? Oh, all right. Jerry's not with us. I guess you're going to call back. So, House of Trump, House of Putin. Here's the question. Now, Craig Unger, your book is an astonishing document on Trump's history as a money launderer for the House of Putin, and before that, House of Yeltsin, and before that, actually, all these billionaires from the former Soviet Union. My understanding, and you can correct me on this, is that Trump's first big set of deals with the Russians was in 84 or 85. He sold 5 condos to a Russian oligarch for $6 million. Is that correct?
Right. In 1984, a guy named David Bogatin met with Trump, and he was I wouldn't call him an oligarch so much as someone who was part of the Russian mafia. And there had been in New York a gas tax scam run by the Russian mafia, partnering with the Italian mafia. And it had been incredibly lucrative, and Bogatin needed to launder money. So he met with Donald Trump, put down $6 million in cash, that's the equivalent of about $15 million today, and said, I'll take 5 condos. And Trump Tower had just been built. It had just opened the previous year, and it was sort of a cathedral of money laundering. One thing I realized in doing this book is that as a way to launder money through real estate. And these kinds of transactions happened with at least 1,300 Trump condos in the United States alone, and his properties all over the world.
Right. So 1,300 transactions. Now, at this point in time, Trump was basically had 4 bankruptcies and a couple of $1 billion in debt. Is that right?
Well, no, that's really later on. And in the 90s, Trump went on and opened all these casinos in Atlantic City, vastly overexpanded, well beyond the marketplace. And in the course of that, he ended up with 6 bankruptcies, and he was $4 billion in debt. And you realize, of course, in the rule in the casino business is a house always wins, right? Well, he ended up $4 billion in debt. That's what kind of businessman he was. After that, the Russian mafia really came to his aid with a completely new business model of franchising his name for luxury condos. So he wouldn't have to put up a dime, and he would collect 18 to 25% royalties just for licensing his name.
God, I wonder what it's worth to license his name now. So,
exactly.
By
way of comparison, I'm not sure exactly the numbers, but if you wanted to franchise Marriott or Hyatt, I'm told the fees are much, much lower, like 3 or 4% franchise fees. But Trump was getting 18 to 25, and a lot of what he was doing was laundering money. And that in his new model, when he started working with Bayrock, which had a lot of ties to Russia, and the Russian mafia. When he started doing that, the financing of those new condos, and it costs $400 or $500 million to build a 50 or 60 story building. All that money was money that could be laundered as well.
Okay, so here's the question. Now that Michael Cohen is on his way to jail, and there has clearly been established illegalities in which Donald Trump was directly involved. The question is, and this is for you, Ted, as well, and Jerry, I don't know if you're still on the line, but did Donald Trump, in the course of his money laundering, break the law?
Well, I mean, there are a few things there. One that's difficult is you have to prove knowledgeability on his part, and that can be quite hard. And when I told you that story a minute ago about David Bogatin, well, can I prove that he knew the money came from the mafia? No, I cannot. I can't prove what was going on inside his head. But I think there's such a legal concept known as intentional or deliberate ignorance, willful blindness. And I think a good prosecutor would say, well, it would be one thing if that just happened once or twice or even 5 or 6 times. It happened at least 1,300 times. I would argue that's a pattern. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what do you think? Is that a good argument?
Yeah. Would the military accept 1,300 variations on a theme and convict him based on that? Ted VAILL, what do you think?
I think it's all tied together, the money laundering, with all of his other crimes, the dealings with Russia in the election, and the impetus for his later criminal activities was all tied to the fact he was so heavily in debt to the Russians financially and the Russian mafia, and that all ties together. So it's one huge matrix that will be presented shortly by Mueller.
Well, it is, absolutely. And one thing Americans don't really get about the Russian mafia, which is very different from the Italian-American mafia in this respect, is that the Russian mafia is a state actor. It serves at the pleasure of Vladimir Putin. When you call Russia a mafia state, that's not just a metaphor, it really is. And the big mobster in my book, Semyon Mogilevich, has met with Putin. They have a relationship. Putin oversees, big. You may want to know, where does the money come from? Well, effectively, the Russian mafia and the oligarchs are skimming money. They're stealing Russia's natural resources. And in the case of Mogilevich, that's the Ukraine energy trade, the Ukraine-Russian energy trade. And they skim about $750 million to $1 billion a year. And Putin gets his slice, and that's what happens. And they need to have political support in Ukraine to get that done. So, hey, they had to hire Paul Manafort, and he was paid. He was working for Putin to make sure those arrangements could stay in place. That's what he was doing.
Manafort was working for Putin, not for Trump?
Well, no, Manafort was in Ukraine for many, many years, for 10 years or so. And he was installing a Putin puppet, Viktor Yanukovych, as president of Ukraine. And effectively, he was an agent for Putin. He was paid $75 million. And when he did that with Yanukovych in Ukraine, in a sense, I believe it was sort of a dry run for what happened 10 years later when he did the same, installing another Putin puppet as president, but this time in the United States.
It would be intriguing if, in fact, Manafort was chartered by Putin or somebody close to Putin to try to penetrate the Trump campaign and become involved in it in March of 2016.
Well, it was very clear he was reporting back all the time. I mean, he was a Putin agent. His sidekick, Konstantin Kilimnik, who was known as KK, Manafort didn't speak Russian or Ukrainian, so he needed someone by him side by side. And Kilimnik was always that man, and he was an intermediary between Putin and Oleg Deripaska, another oligarch. So you're going right into Putin's inner circle with a hop, skip, and a jump. And he is reporting to Deripaska and trying to get in his good graces. I mean, Manafort has financial issues, and even though he made $75 million, he managed to blow it all and was deeply, deeply in debt to these oligarchs. So he owed them, and one of the ways he was paying back was giving them information. He was granting him, I'm giving you access to the next president of the United States. And that was
so
going on very much
person
so
who ran Trump's campaign was perhaps a Russian agent and owed more loyalty to Putin than to the United States of America and the person he was working for.
Putin, and he had received about $75 million in total.
From Putin? Did the money that he got come from Putin?
No, it's from various oligarchs. But if you want, but again, all the oligarchs are merely a step down from Putin. They serve at Putin's pleasure. They're all work together. It's all the same team. And the reason the oligarchs do that is because Putin allows them to solidify the political arrangements that will allow them to skim, say, $1 billion here off the Ukraine energy trade, or out of the aluminum industry with Deripaska and Chernoy, Mikhail Chernoy, who's one of the aluminum oligarchs with Deripaska. And so these battles
one of them
are going on.
One of them had a deal with Manafort and claimed Manafort owed him $15 million, and he better pay up.
That was Deripaska. That was Deripaska.
Yes.
And so during the election campaign, you see Manafort's emails to Konstantin Kilimnik say, I would like to get back in Deripaska's good graces. Let me give him briefings about Trump, and I'll give him the inside on the campaign, which is very, very valuable to knowledge if you control a commodity like aluminum.
God,
we're talking with Craig Unger and TED VAILL
about Trump's connections to Russia. Did Manafort ever meet personally with Putin?
I don't know that he met personally with Putin, and I don't know how important that is. But his roots the thing is, Manafort, even I'm trying to think back to the exact date. In 1992, a friend of mine named Art Levine did a wonderful, funny story in Spy magazine on the dictator's lobby and on the most corrupt lobbyists in Washington, and their names were Paul Manafort and Roger Stone. And their firm existed under various different names at various times. But essentially, they took on the most corrupt tyrants all over the world, and they made jokes about it. They reveled in the corruption. So they would represent Ferdinand Marcos, looting the Philippines for billions, or Jonas Savimbi, or various dictators all over the world. So then they step it up a notch once the Soviet Union crumbles, and so Manafort and Ukraine is really just in a spectacular example of corruption, where you have a guy taking $75 million, essentially indirectly from Putin, if you like, to represent Russia's interests completely against American foreign policy. God. And that's what. To me, this is a new age of kleptocracy, and it's what Putin does, and Trump is doing exactly the same.
Unbelievable. So here's the question then. I have to say, and you guys are in a better position than me to judge this. It seems to me that Mueller has actually met all expectations, and that he's really done the job here in the process of doing it. The question is, when does the other shoe drop? I mean, Craig Unger, you have documented, as has Robert K. Johnston, Trump's life in crime, pretty much from the time he was 6 years old when his father gave him a six-figure salary, and he was essentially, a child money launderer. But the question, and we all waiting, those of us who followed your work, Craig and Ted, are waiting for the other shoe to drop, which is not just the current and recent connections between Trump, Putin, and the campaign, but the history of money laundering. Which
this is Harvey. This is my
into.
Life, waiting for that shoe to drop. It's
How about tomorrow? How about tomorrow? It could happen tomorrow. Mueller does things on Friday.
I think in January, when the Democrats take over, the House Intelligence Committee will be definitely going into money laundering. And I've seen some of their internal memos, and I know they know about it. And both Adam Schiff has said that on TV, and Jackie Spear, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, is a congresswoman in California. So I know they are taking
Jackie
that
Spear.
seriously. But the shoe, John McCain said this centipede has a lot of shoes to drop. There's
some of them are made of cement. These are cement shoes, apparently.
Right.
I mean, I have a piece up at Reader Supported News. I don't know if you guys saw it. It's a question. The title is Michael Cohen now Trumputin's dead meat? I mean, the point is the life expectancy of Michael Cohen. These guys, somebody's going to, I hate to say it, but he's in great danger of retribution if the mafia from the Russians operates anything like the mafia that we know of the Italian Americans. I mean, he's violated every Omerta code of the mafia creed. I just don't know how they can protect him. But the bottom line here is that the crimes that Trump is being connected to now in terms of collusion are minuscule. If the stuff he was doing with these 1,300 transactions are as they appear to be. I mean, Ted, how would the military approach a guy who did 1,300 transactions with oligarchs to launder money, which, to my understanding, is not legal? I mean, maybe you know it better than me.
Well, the military does not like the Russians. I handled at one time an investigation on a collision between an American nuclear sub and a Russian nuclear sub, and they're still doing it all the time. The military is fighting the Russians every day, and in the air, underwater, and not directly on the ground, but maybe naval vessels that almost collide with each other. So the military does not like the Russians.
Well, I'm looking at the front page of the New York Times here, Craig Unger, and Maria Butina has pleaded guilty. And she is, right, of course, her big connection is to the National, who can make this up, to the National Rifle Association. So is the National Rifle Association now also implicated in money laundering?
Well, it's more that the money that you have Russian money going into the NRA and the Republican Party. I mean, it's just incredibly corrupt. I mean, that's supposed to be illegal. Also, one of the interesting things about Maria Butina is that in the summer of 2015, at one of Trump's very early campaign appearances, she asked him a question about, if he becomes president, will he lift sanctions against Russia? And let's remember, she is a spy.
She asked Trump personally? She asked
Donald
Trump
personally?
Yeah,
she asked him personally it was a
press
public
conference.
Appearance.
It was a press conference, and it was one of his first ones.
Right.
It wasn't like
it wasn't like she's a Russian spy. How did that happen? What's behind all that? I don't know the answer, but it's a really interesting question, because just imagine if an American spy did that with Putin. I mean, that would be very elaborate, and there'd be some Baroque explanation behind it.
And if you had LaPierre in handcuffs coming before a federal judge for knowingly accepting Russian money laundering money, that would be just wonderful.
Yeah.
Is Maria Butina here in the United States? I mean, they've got her.
She's been in solitary confinement for the last month here in the U.S.
Is she an American citizen or a Russian citizen?
She's a Russian citizen.
Yeah, I believe that's true. I don't think she's American.
And she was just before a judge today. I don't know exactly what happened in that hearing.
She pleaded guilty. She pleaded guilty. It's right here on the front page.
That's right. She pleaded guilty. And
she met Donald
I'm
Trump
sure
personally.
And she's been cooperating. Who put her up to this? And who did she talk to? And who did she get agreements with? Wayne LaPierre?
Okay, so, are we saying that what she did NRA? With the... are we saying what she did with the NRA was illegal? It must have. Oh, she must have pleaded guilty to something. So there's got to be a charge here. What did she plead guilty to?
It looks like she was using the NRA to funnel money from the Russians to the Republican Party. So we'll see.
Who can make this up? Ted? Are you making this up? I mean, really?
I am not. Craig, this I think is. We're going to hear about this shortly. That essentially donations through her from the Russian dirty money was coming to the NRA, and the NRA was making contributions to the Republican Party. Now, whether they can tie all those knots together is something that Mueller will have to do.
Well, these guys are really sloppy, though, aren't they?
Yeah,
I mean, they don't really. They were so loosey goosey here. I don't think they cared much, or took. We know how Trump operates. I mean, he wasn't concerned about being illegal. He just figured he's Donald Trump, right? The law doesn't apply to Donald Trump. And we see now he's blaming all the money laundering.
He just said that that Michael Cohen, he's my lawyer. He makes the decisions. No, it doesn't work that way. The lawyer asks the client, shall I go ahead with this? And
that's one thing Trump does.
And Michael Cohen has it on tape. He has Trump speaking on tape saying, yeah, go ahead. Is it going to be cash?
One thing Trump always does is he makes his lawyers go operational. They are intimately involved in the crime, and they even perform some of it. And that way he can claim attorney-client privilege, which is supposedly not operative in the commission of a crime, right?
Yeah, crime fraud exception. Crime fraud exception to the attorney-client privilege. I'm an attorney. I can tell you that. And Michael Cohen, he's asking Trump, we got to come up with some money to pay this hush money. And he's taping it because he knows his client, Donald Trump, is going to say, I never said that. You just did it on your own. Well, he's got Trump on tape saying, should it be cash or whatever? And Trump is not asking. He just denied it. Then they immediately played the tape.
So Trump's not asking, is this legal? He's saying, is it cash? How about,
shall we pay in cash or what? And Cohen said, no, not cash.
So did Trump ever say to Michael Cohen, is it credit card so I can get the miles? He never said that, right? So what we're saying
that was not on the tape, no. But
that was not on the tape, no.
What is this guy doing? I mean, Trump says something that he almost certainly knows that there's strong evidence, such as his own voice, that contradicts it. I mean, is he talking to his deplorables, and because they don't listen, they don't care? What is this guy, Trump? I mean, he has lied so many times, it's ridiculous. And, the man has no credibility on anything he says right now. And
so if you were prosecuting him,
that's the most important thing for a president, to have credibility. So when he talks to the American people, they believe him.
Well, he's only talking to 60% of the Republican Party. That's what he's talking to. That's who he talks to. I just heard yesterday that 60% of the Republican Party according to a poll, would support him shutting the government down to build the wall. So that must be his hardcore. 60% of the Republican Party. So Craig Unger, in your amazingly detailed House of Trump, House of Putin, these 1,300 transactions that he did with Russian oligarchs, how many of you would say, if you were Robert Mueller, would you say would be prosecutable?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, I think what and I'm not a lawyer, but to me, what you see is there are a couple things. One is an ongoing criminal enterprise. If you look at all the relationships in the Trump organization, these kinds of deals going on for more than 30 years. But the other thing is when the deals are with the Russian mafia, and I just think very few Americans get that the Russian mafia is a state actor, and that's hugely important, unlike the American mafia. And the Russians use it the way we might use the CIA. I mean, they're affiliated with the KGB. I interviewed the former head of counterintelligence for the KGB, Oleg Kalugin, and he said, "Oh, the mafia, yeah, we use them all the time." They would, and he himself, General Kalugin, when he was a young spy in New York, would go into the Russian nightclubs in Brighton Beach in Brooklyn. They were called Titania and Rasputin, and he would recruit spies there. So they were really important. And when you realize they are located, that part of their operations were on and off located in the home of the President of the United States, I think that's a major problem, no?
God. So what is the Maria Butina, Craig, what is the Maria Butina guilty plea? She pleaded guilty to, according to the New York Times, to a single charge of conspiring to act as a foreign agent in a deal, and she made the deal with federal prosecutors. But she had face-to-face conversations with Trump. Was she operating when she talked with Trump as a foreign agent? And did he know?
Well, I don't know how to answer that really. I mean, but she is being paid. She was working for a guy named Alexander Torshin, who was a pretty powerful, high-level Russian politician. But I assume she was reporting to him, and he was pretty powerful and close to Putin. But one thing that the whole idea of Russia doesn't allow any gun rights, right? So they're completely against the NRA when it comes to Russia. And the idea they're promoting it in the United States is so obviously against their stated interests, unless, of course, they have a political agenda, which is precisely what's going on. So you see their money going in, and it's just funneled right to the Republican Party. Obviously, I think it's as simple as that.
God.
To answer your question, I don't know if one transaction involving a Russian who buys a condo would be illegal. But when you have the 1,200, you know exactly what's going on. You have to know over time that this is dirty money that's coming in, and some of it comes in and the condo will be purchased by an LLC and not a person. Most people in New York who sell condos, you have to know where the money comes from. And there also could be New York state crimes involved here as well as federal crimes.
Well,
New York City.
That's a big key here, of course. And the question is going to come up. Obviously, Trump is thinking about his pardon powers, but his pardon powers don't have any weight in the state courts in New York. Is that correct? He can't
right.
pardon a state crime. And
the new attorney general there has said, "I'm going after him in every which way on dirty money and everything else." So that has to give him a lot of heartburn, Trump, because he might try to pardon himself for federal crimes, but it doesn't touch state crimes at all. It does not touch state crimes.
And of course, most of the money laundering was done in New York. Is that correct? That would be correct,
Yes.
right? I mean, most of these transactions.
Not entirely. I mean, there's stuff going on. Once they start in 2002, Trump began partnering with the Bayrock Group, which was, and the entire leadership. You know, Felix Sater was managing director, and everyone had ties to Russia in that. So they built Trump Tower. They did build Trump Soho here in New York. But they, I'm trying to remember if it was them or not. You know, Trump also did stuff in Panama, in Azerbaijan, Baku, Azerbaijan. He, you know, only I think roughly half of his properties are in the United States. And it's quite possible that there's even less regulation in places like Panama than there is in the United States. I mean, I was astonished at the number of Russians who were buying in Panama because, let's face it, it's not exactly convenient, right? I mean, if you live in Minsk, are you going to get a weekend place in Panama? I don't think so.
Yeah, well, you take over Noriega's place. We're talking with Craig Unger, author of House of Trump, House of Putin, and Ted VAILL of Malibu, a former military prosecutor. We're going to be joined shortly by Steve Rosenfeld, talk about some election stuff, which I hope you guys will stay with because some questions I want to ask. So here's a question for you, Craig. I would bet a dime to a dollar that Mueller has read your book, House of Trump, House of Putin. If you were Mueller, what would you do with the information in your book about Trump?
Well, the thing is, Mueller knows everything long before I've written it. I mean, a lot of, and I say that because a lot of the stuff was I got what came from FBI documents, and also Mueller had when he was at the FBI, there was a Budapest task force, and at the time, Simeon Mogilevich, the financial whiz behind the Russian mafia, was based in Budapest, and he was their prime target. So Mueller knows all about this. And there are really a lot of unanswered questions in my mind about why the FBI didn't stop it earlier. For example, Felix Sater was a cooperating, an informer for the FBI, and he was managing director of Bayrock, which was laundering all this money. Well, what did his FBI handlers know that he was laundering money? How was that allowed to go on and on and on for years? Or was Felix really working for Mogilevich even then?
Oh, God. So basically, what we could presume here is that Mueller has had so much stuff to deal with, just between Manafort and Cohen on the domestic front, that he probably just hasn't gotten around to the stuff about. There's a worse. The worst theory for me is that Felix Sater is, I don't know if you're familiar with Whitey Bulger. Is the audience familiar with Whitey Bulger? Oh, yeah. He was
the Boston
I'm from
gangster.
Boston, so, yeah.
But he was a cooperating witness for the FBI, and they allowed him to keep doing crime while he was informing. So he killed 11 people or something who were rival mobsters. And he was a mass murderer, and while he was working for the FBI, they let him get away with murder. The movie The Departed goes into that a bit. It's sort of
and he just was killed himself in jail. He was killed in jail.
Right.
Yes.
Right. He was. That's him. Well, the question is Felix Sater another Whitey Bulger, that he was cooperating with the FBI, but he was also laundering money with Donald Trump and involved in all these illegal shenanigans, and they let him get away with it.
The money laundering thing has been going on well before Mueller came on board. The FBI was looking at the Russian money laundering for a year or maybe more than a year before that. So
that's true. But for example, there was a big bust in Trump Tower in 2013 where they busted 2 money laundering rings. So the FBI was behind that. They knew all about that. What was Felix Sater's role in that? Or if we know that Bayrock, which was building the Trump Soho, raised $450 million, and a lot of it came from the FL Group, which is Russian mob money. And I mean, there are court cases about all this. I'm not just that's where I got my information from, was from court documents.
Jeez, I mean, it's mind-boggling what's about to happen here. I mean, I got to tell you, I was on a beach in Mexico in 1973, and I got a hold of just completely in the middle of nowhere, and somehow a Time magazine got in my hands about Watergate, and I immediately backed up and came home. And it was so much. I won't say. Yeah, it was fun. It was really fun. And I don't know if you got. Well, part of the reason was because I had edited, and I don't know if you guys knew Jeff Gerth, and if he's still around. But he, in 1972, wrote a massive article, which you can get online. Just Google Jeff Gerth, Nixon and the Mafia. And it was, 5,000-6,000 words on Nixon's ties to the Mafia. And it had no impact whatsoever. I mean, we're already deep in the Watergate. Nixon had already committed treason by sabotaging the 68 Vietnam peace talks. He had already illegally bombed Cambodia. None of that came up in Watergate. There was not a mention in the whole Watergate proceeding of Nixon's ties to the underworld, or of his illegal bombing, or the sabotage of the peace talks, or the illegal bombing of Cambodia. It was strictly focused on that what he called third-rate burglary. Now we're in the middle of an incredible swamp here.
Do you know the name Bibi Rebozo?
Yeah, that was Nixon's guy. He was. Oh, hey, Jerry, are you back with us? There. Okay, and Steve Rosenfeld, are you with us? Steve Rosenfeld, have you signed in yet? Okay, so Jerry, we're continuing to talk here about Trump and this incredible miasma here. I can't imagine that Trump is going to escape out of this without Craig Unger's amazing material coming up about his money laundering.
Well, but in case it happened with Watergate and all that stuff. We'll see. I
got to say one other thing on the on the front page of the New York Times that I'm looking at here. Here's a headline for you, and it's a headline for history. Senate votes to limit war powers in Yemen. A rebuke to the Saudis. It's not just a rebuke to Saudis. It shows that this idea that the Senate will not vote to remove Donald Trump, I think, is a myth. I mean, they've cracked twice now. First, you had that one senator, the only African American Republican senator who killed that one court nomination. That's the first sign of any kind of dissidence on the in the Republicans. But now this took 20-some Republicans voting against Trump to cut off the war powers in Yemen. This is a big deal, right? Wouldn't you think, Craig?
Right. I do think if it becomes clear Trump is a loser, the senators will start to crack. I do think at a certain point that's going to happen. Yeah,
I agree with that. And you have a number of them up for re-election in 2020, and if they go through 2019 and defending this guy who's already been impeached in the House, and there's this huge amount of evidence, that's what they mainly want to do. They want to get reelected, and they will crump Trump on Trump.
That's a new verb. I haven't heard the verb crump. I like it though. It's good. Maybe be specific to Trump. Now, Jerry Ashton, you're in the middle of all this on the health care issue. What do you think? Do you think this is all going to have an impact on trying to get Medicare for all? If Trump is so severely weakened like this?
Well, if you take a look at the fact that corralling these cats and trying to get a decent law out of them is difficult, even under the most extreme pressures of their own internal and external politics. The very fact that you're trying to get these people to agree to any kind of an improvement on health care is almost asking too much.
Well, I would say, we've got Nancy Pelosi in there, and unlike many others, and Steve Rosenfeld, we want to welcome you on. This has been a really amazing conversation, let me tell you. And Steve is the expert on elections, and I want to ask him next. We've just won a major court victory, but in terms of health care for all, I have to say that Nancy Pelosi has been very corporate and very conservative, but I think if there's anybody who could drive Donald Trump completely up the wall, it would be Nancy Pelosi. And he's going to go completely nuts. I don't know is Nancy Pelosi, does she have a history of supporting, what's her history, Jerry ASHTON, on health care, Nancy Pelosi?
Well, as you know, I represent a charity called RIP Medical Debt. We're a 501c3 located in New York City. We work nationally, and our job basically with RIP Medical Debt is to search out unpaid and unpayable medical debt, purchase that debt with the monies given us by donors, and then forgiving that debt. So in our work of sweeping up after the parade, we would rather be at the front of the parade, rather be with Nancy Pelosi or anybody else, and she's a personal favorite of mine. Anytime we are able to change policy means a greater opportunity for our charity to go out of business. And frankly, we would love to have that happen.
How much medical debt is there in this country?
There's over $1 trillion in medical debt in America right now. And as you know, and thanks for touting our book on our last interview, we wrote a book called End Medical Debt. And End Medical Debt has 11 chapters in it, and there are three authors, the three founders of RIP Medical Debt, in which we argue separately the case of how to handle $1 trillion worth of medical debt and get rid of it.
Well, I'm going to say, and we're going to move a little further here, that part of the situation with Trump, and I'm sure Craig and Ted and Steve, you'll agree with me, is the tenuous situation of our economy. I mean, the only thing that I can see that's propping up Trump at this point is an alleged strong economy, which has basically been achieved with a methamphetamine injection of a $1.5 trillion tax cut for the rich. That's the only reason that we have a alleged low unemployment rate. And the house of cards that I see in the economy, which I think Trump is just about to crash, it's got four walls. It's got student debt, it's got medical debt, it's got a stock market that's just basically very, very tenuous, and it's got a housing market that's also vastly overblown. And the minute one or more of these walls crashes down, I see the whole economy going. I mean, you can't run a business or a country with an idiot like this who's so completely corrupt and expect anything to happen. And, anything to sustain itself. I don't know when the economy is going to go down, but I think there's absolutely no doubt it will. Nothing's been solved since the 2008 crisis, for God's sakes. We've just been running on fumes. And, when you have today a double whammy here of this woman, Maria Butina, pleading guilty, funneling money through the NRA and having met personally with Trump, and then you have the Senate finally, Republicans breaking with Trump on the Yemen war powers. God, we're just all waiting for the crash to come here. Now, Steve Rosenfeld, I wanted to bring you in quickly because, and please, Ted and Craig, stay with us, and Jerry. A major electoral victory has come. Jill Stein, God love her, the only hero to emerge from the 2018 election, stuck with it on a legal case. And Steve, do you want to tell us about this legal case and the victory she's just won? And then I'm going to ask you a much deeper question. But tell us about this one, because I want to get on record.
What people may remember is on election night 2016, many people were shocked, stunned, whatever verb you want to use, with Trump's victory. And it came down to three final states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and then Pennsylvania, which had the three closest margins. And what happened was everybody wanted to know why and what happened. And let me just really compress it. Let's just say people involved with the Greens who have done presidential recounts before, and with the Libertarians going back to 2004 in Ohio, took a look at what they thought were some of the unanswered questions. Some of these had to do with ballots that had been rejected. Some of these had to do with the threat of possible computer hacking. And they tried to get the Clinton campaign to file for a recount, and they couldn't do it. And then they tried to get the campaign.
Mind-boggling.
Well,
but go ahead.
Then they tried to get the Clinton campaign to suggest some of their donors who might support such a recount, and they couldn't do it. So then, on the weekend before Thanksgiving, Jill Stein and Alex Halderman, a University of Michigan computer scientist, and then John Bonifaz, a longtime voting rights attorney, they went public, and they started to crowdsource funding. And literally over a week, they raised, I forget, something like $7.5 million, which nobody expected. So that paid for these multi-million-dollar recount fees to start the process in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. In Michigan, the Republicans shut it down before it finished, kind of like a mini Florida. And in Wisconsin, it went across the finish line, but people didn't like that they were using these high-speed scanners, people being activists. And in Pennsylvania, it was even worse than Michigan because due to the late date of the filing, they basically couldn't get counties to actually even accept recount petitions. Judges said you got to pay $1 million bonds, all kinds of crazy stuff. So they sued, and then lo and behold, almost 2 years later, we get a settlement. And so this is what you were really asking about. So what do we get in Pennsylvania? Well, the Greens get their court costs, $150,000 or something like that. They get a commitment by 2020 to have all new voting machines that are basically paper ballot backed. They get a commitment by 2022 to have an audit process, what they call pre-certification, and that's really important because that's before any results become official. They get a seat at the table for planning processes when they go about these next, equipment purchases, and they get the right to go back into court. So that for a recount process that was universally outside of green and progressive circles criticized. The law professors thought it was ridiculous. Fox News went crazy. The Republicans said it was a joke. They got a federal court settlement by Pennsylvania to improve its election administration.
So that's a fantastic piece of news in the middle of all this other stuff. So Jill Stein emerges from the 2018 election and wins. It's got to be considered a landmark court case, forcing Pennsylvania to basically clean up its act in counting ballots. And I assume that this would stand as a model for the nation in terms of technology. It requires hand-marked paper ballots, right? Now, some of the machines that were approved will count these ballots electronically, but they still can be backed up with hand-marked paper ballots throughout the state of Pennsylvania. Is that correct?
Yeah, so 16 Pennsylvania counties, most of them rural, used entirely electronic machines. These are the ones that are over a decade old, the same ones that are used in states like Georgia. And there was no recount possibility whatsoever. But what's happened since then, or in the last couple of years, is most counties, elections are run mostly at the county level in America. Most states and counties have been moving towards paper ballot-backed voting systems. And the main reason is it can't be hacked. There's a recount record, and even though it's cumbersome, it's seen as being just more believable. And
so here's we're close on time. So I want to ask you a $64 trillion question, Steve, and because the theme we've been talking about the Russians and Trump. What do you think that the Russian role, and you've been one of the leading experts now on certainly the 2018 election, do you think the Russian role in the 2018 election was in fact significant?
Was it what? Word you used?
Significant. Was it significant? All this stuff, all the money laundering, all the Manafort and Manafort, has ties to the guys who rigged. Yeah, okay. Paul Manafort had direct ties to the guys who rigged the 2004 election in Ohio. So
I think it was.
What?
I think.
Go ahead.
I think that some things that they did were very damaging. For example, but I don't necessarily think it's what everybody may be thinking. Whoever stole all of the Clinton campaign emails and got them to WikiLeaks, and the Feds say it was Russia. That was incredibly damaging to the Clinton campaign, because it created this drip of stuff that you just couldn't trust. And
oh no, God, we're out. Listen, what a great show. We're going to come back and do more of this with you guys. Steve, thanks. Okay. Jerry, Craig, Ted, it was incredible. We're going to have more, and we'll get back to you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Of Eden.
Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia, Solartopia, Solartopia. Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia all over